Right, awesome. Okay, so let's get started. Getting late. Parshas Lech Lecha, and amazing story. The story of Lech Lecha. Here's Abram. He's 75 years old. He's living in a city, living in a home with his family, and he's told, "I want you to leave this place. I want you to go to a brand new place, a place you have no idea where you're going to." Right? You can't even set the GPS because he's just going to this land. And God tells him, when you get to this land, I will make your life great. You haven't had children yet. You're 75 years old. You go to this new land, you're going to have children. Not only children, you have a huge nation's going to come at you. You have no idea what's yet to come. Like he thought he was already, preaching, approaching his senior citizen status. And here God says, no, you can have a whole nation come at you still. Just, you're not done yet. And I'm going to make you very famous. I'm going to make you very wealthy. I'm going to give you lots of blessings. You're going to have so many good things are going to come out of you. And he goes to this land. And as we know the story, he shows up. And not only does the land not amazing and doesn't seem like a whole lot of, financial opportunity, but there's a famine going on and he has to pick up and leave. And I once heard a great analogy. It's like somebody, rents an Airbnb for a vacation. He takes his wife away for a vacation and he rents one of these Airbnbs. And, when you rent them, they show you pictures, right? You have no idea which one to take. There's all kinds of different ones in different areas. This one's got this looking picture and that. They all look good in the pictures, right? But when you show up and you walk into the bathroom to wash your hand, you open the sink and the faucet comes off, you realize, oh no, I made the wrong choice, And it's like, that's what happened. Abram, he shows up this land. He thinks everything's going to be so great. And all of a sudden, famine. And no one else had a famine. Only the land of Israel had a famine. The land where everywhere else was fine. And you had to wonder what was going through his mind. So anyway, he goes to Egypt, and there's a discussion in the Rishonim, in the commentaries there. Was it the right move or the wrong move? Was this a positive action or actually a sin? So Rashi says it was the right thing to do. You show up, there's a famine, you have the right that you have to pick up and move. You got to do something about, you got to support at least the wife. I would say support the family, support the wife. He had people with him. You got to take care of them. You can't just leave them in a famine to rot, to die. But at the same time, the test was not to go, wondering, what did God do to me? Not to start complaining, right? We know how to complain. I think any of us would have complained to that situation. You told me to come here. You thought it'd be great and look at this place, right? It's a famine. There's nothing to do here. And I'm not wealthy. I'm not getting wealthy anytime soon. Nothing's positive here. To not come with that complaint. Do what you had to do and not come with a complaint. And he passed the test. That's what Rashi says. The Ramban, Nachmanides, in his commentary writes, no, it was a mistake. Avram did the wrong thing. He went to Egypt. He should not have done so. God did not tell him to go to Egypt. God said, go to Israel. He didn't tell him where to go, but he showed him this is the land you have to go to. Stay here. He had no business picking up and leaving. He had to have faith in the Creator. And what kind of faith? Well, we know the Jewish people lived in the desert for 40 years. There was nothing growing. They no better than a famine, right? God can make manna come down from the heavens. God can take care of them. So the fact that he didn't have faith and stick around, I guess Abraham, he didn't know the story yet because it didn't happen yet with the Jews in the desert. But nonetheless, he should have had faith. He should have stuck around. So that Ramban counts this episode as a point against Avram. And this is an amazing thing because it kind of distorts our image. The picture, that we have, I was taught as a kid, by my Mora in kindergarten, Avram was a tzaddik and he had, he was so righteous. He had 10 tests. He passed all of them, flying colors. There was never a doubt, go slaughter your kid, no problem. He was ready to do anything. And here we have no, he had a strike against him. He failed. He was 10 and 1, 10 wins and 1 loss. He had a loss. He had a failure. He went down to Egypt when he shouldn't have. And Rabbi Shamshon Hirsch, the great author and writer, prolific writer and scholar, 1700s, he writes about this, that this is a very fundamental point that we have to drill into our heads. It's actually kind of differentiates the way we study as we grow up. One of the things that's kind of unfortunate is that we maintain our understanding of what happened throughout the history of the Torah, the stories of the Torah. We learned it when we were little kids, and we kind of maintained that understanding of little children. We don't quite develop. And it's really, really important to kind of develop. Our understanding should grow as we grow. As we get smarter, we get more intelligence and more experience in life. We should start to understand the Torah and these stories with some more depth and some more maturity. And Rav Hirsch says that this is really one of those examples, understanding that Avram actually failed one of his tests. What does that tell us? What the fact that he failed one of his tests, what does that tell us? So I heard a great analogy of this. Maybe when you were in school, maybe in high school, maybe in college, You worked hard, to study and prepare for tests and everything else. And there's always this one student, maybe in some cases, many students who are just, they seem to get 100 no matter what. They come in, 100. You ask the kid, you studied? You studied? Let's say, yeah, I spent 5 minutes. I looked it over. I kind of heard some things in class. They went in one ear. I guess they stuck around. I wasn't sure I prepared. He gets 100 on the test. Plus he answers the bonus questions. He gets 110 on his test. And you sit there, right? I don't know if this is you. This was me for sure. You sit there and you study and review and you underline and you review it again. And and you work so hard for hours, you wind up with an 87, and you're wondering, what is this? Now I get the 87. I work so hard. He gets the 110. He's putting in barely any time. What's up with that? How does that work? And in the world that we live in, that person is viewed as more successful. He's going to be better off. Oh, you got the 110. Exactly. I agree with you. Daniel probably got the 110, right? You know that kid, right? That kid actually annoyed me, but actually I was in a high school where it was actually a selective high school. They accepted very few students and somehow they accepted me. I was in a class of everyone got over a 90. Everyone, and they didn't sleep and they somehow didn't study and they all got over a 90, and I was in the 80s, and I was working my tail off and they were all just I don't know what happened over there. It was not a good mix. But anyways, that's success. In our world, we live in a world where bottom line counts. If you are successful, I don't care if you were successful because you were born with it. I don't care if you're successful because you have certain advantages. If you are successful, you're on top. And if you're not successful, you're on the bottom. And that's the world we live in. We don't care about how you got there. But in Judaism, it doesn't work that way. Success is not measured by where you get, but it's by how hard you work. That's where it's the fum tsara agra. According to the challenge for you, that's your reward. God doesn't care about where you got. It's how much effort did you put into it. The famous Talmud tells us that after 120, we're going to go upstairs and we're going to see a olam hafuchos, an upside down world. We're going to see a world where we saw people who we thought should be on top, and they're not going to be on top. And we saw people who we thought would be, lower down, and they're all the way on top. And what's up with that? Because in the upper worlds, we are rewarded according to our efforts that we put into things. And some people may have not had it that easy to be successful. And they worked very, very hard. And they didn't become the greatest scholars. And they weren't necessarily even the greatest Jews. But you know what? They really, really applied themselves and really, really worked and got to where they got to. And maybe you have other people who had it really, really easy. They were raised with all the amenities. They had it all planned out. They're raised in, just imagine, if you look in our society today, some Jews are born into Jewish religious homes where they're trained from, the time they're 3 years old. All they do is study and they go into the best schools and the best teachers. And they had everything lined up for them. The fact that they're more knowledgeable than someone who didn't grow up with any of that, in our world, he's more knowledgeable, he's less, he's a better Jew, so to speak. He's less, not in the upper worlds. No, in the upper worlds, this guy had it easy and he didn't do much with it. And this guy had it really hard and he had to work. And until 18, he knew nothing. And then he, learned a little bit and he had to work. And it was hard for him at that stage of life. And he had to, abandon his old friends and change his lifestyle. That's a tremendous accomplishment. And the upper worlds, they're going to look at that and say, wow, so we have no idea who's going to be on top and who's going to be on bottom in the next world. But it's not about success. It's not where you got, it's how hard you worked. So by seeing, says Rav Hirsch, and this is where Rav Hirsch comes in, he says, when you see this story like this, and you see this bit in the Ramban Nachmanides, he tells you, Avram did not have it easy. We were raised with this attitude. Avram was this tzaddik. Whatever God tells him, he does. God says jump, he says how high. He did everything right. So, we can't really relate to that, Avram. But when we see this picture, Avram struggled. Avram passed 10 tests. He was great, not because he passed 10 tests. He was great because he struggled. 10 tests, each one of them harder than the next, and he struggled. And he even failed. Look, there's one he failed. That means he worked. That means he struggled. That means it was not easy for him. And yet he succeeded. That's the greatness of Avram, not the 10 tests. And this is the kind of mature approach we have to have when we study the stories of Parshas, the stories. And honestly, it goes on and on. Look at Moshe. You look at Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher Moshe, the greatest Jew who ever lived, most likely. What does it say about him in the Torah? It says, Vaish Moshe Anav Mikol Adam. He was the most humble person to ever live. He was humility. That was his thing. He was the most humble person. Amazingly enough, when you look at the story of the rock, where he hit the rock, where he wasn't supposed to, his quote unquote sin, of course, on his level, that was a sin. Okay, but it actually talks about where did that sin come from? It comes from the speech he gave the Jewish people right before he hit that rock. And the Jewish people deserved it. They were bugging him like, Moshe, we're thirsty. Give us water. I'm in the middle of the desert. What do you want from me? Believe in God, he'll take care of you. No, Moshe, you took us out, give us water. And he was like pulled in a few directions. And he gives them this speech, Shimuna Hamarim, listen to me, you rebellious people. And the Talmud tells us there was just an ounce of anger, perhaps even an ounce of arrogance in that speech. And it was justified. Oh, for us, it was justified. But for Moshe, it showed you an element of arrogance, even in the greatest, most humble person of all time. Rav Hirsch says the same idea there. He says, you see Moshe, you see this humble individual. Don't think he was born some humble individual who never had a complaint in his life, who never got angry in his life, who never had any feeling of arrogance. No, that's not what made Moshe great. What made Moshe great is that he fought and he accomplished. That's what made Moshe great. It wasn't this like born with it attitude that we seem to believe. I'll give you one more example. The story of Yosef HaTzadik. We'll get there in a few parshios. We know Yosef. What is he known for? What was his greatest action of all time? He was able to resist one of the most difficult temptations. He was an 18-year-old kid stuck in a home where the wife of Potiphar is seducing him day after day after day. And he had a very difficult temptation, a very difficult situation where I don't know how many people would be successful, and he managed to resist. That's what Yosef is known for. I'll tell you what the Talmud tells us. On the day that he was, so to speak, caught by the authorities and put in jail, right? That day, it says, "Vayavo Yosef habayis alasos malachto." Yosef came in to do his work that day, and the Talmud tells us two approaches what that means. And one of the approaches of the Talmud is, you know what it means? It means he came in that day intending to sin. That's what it means. He actually walked in that day and said, "Enough with this. I can't resist this anymore, and I'm giving in." That's how he walked in that day. And in the end, he had this image of his father in front of him, and he resisted, and he said no. And at that point, she grabs his garment, he runs outside, and the whole story happens. He winds up in jail. But amazing, Joseph was ready to sin. He was ready to throw in the towel. That's the Joseph. We don't learn the story when we were kids, that's for sure. That's not the children's version of the story. But what it tells us is that this Joseph who resisted temptation, he was human. You know, almost like we can almost relate to that Yosef. Yes, a Yosef who fights and who struggles and who maybe was even about to fall till, he made it out. That's a Yosef we can relate to, a Yosef that struggled. The Yosef was so amazing because he struggled and he succeeded. So I'll tell you an amazing statement by Rav Hutner, the famous Rosh Yeshiva of Chaim Berlin. Rav Hutner has a lot of very, very sharp statements, and this is one of them. He was talking about the biographies that are written for our great sages. There's a lot of biographies. You go on the Art Scroll website, you'll see biographies of all the great rabbis. And they really are truly magnificent. I highly recommend reading them. They're phenomenal. But he has like one complaint on them, on these biographies. He says, they talk about a certain righteous person. They talk about the Chafetz Chaim, for example, and they talk about he was such a tzaddik, he was born a tzaddik, and all he wanted to do was study, and his friends went out to play ball, and he wanted to study Torah, and all he wanted to do, he never spoke a word of Lashon Hara, he didn't know how to speak gossip, like he was so righteous and so holy and everything else, and that's the way they write the story. And the story has its benefits. Listen, it gives us certain, something to look up to, certain goals, certain motivation, they're phenomenal. But he says, but you're missing such an important element of the story. What about the struggles? What about the failures? What about all that? That's what makes a person righteous. It's not like you're born righteous and you just are. It doesn't work that way. The Chafetz Chaim, to be the person to never speak gossip, you know what he had to do? He had to struggle, and he had to fight, and he had to fail, says Rav Hutner. The Chafetz Chaim failed time and time again until he got to the point that he was able to get strong enough to be able to resist the desire to speak Lashon Hara and to go out and write his books and fix the world with this element. And it's a process. It's not just like you're born with it. And it's so important to speak this part out. The Talmud tells us, Sheva Yipol Tzaddik V'Kam, a righteous person falls 7 times and he still continues to get up. That's a righteous person. It's not someone who's born with it. So such an important concept. I almost can't speak about it enough, and I'm giving a lot of information about this idea, but it really is something that's missing from the typical approach to telling over these stories. We tend to just oversimplify it. They were super righteous. They were angels. They never had a temptation in their lives, and it doesn't relate to us. And when we see it this way, we see even the greatest people of all time, they struggled. They even fell. They weren't just born with it. It gives us a perspective that this kind of is attainable, because just because we fell and we fall, right, it doesn't mean that we can't continue to become great, right? The tzaddikim are not infallible, right? They were fallible. We too are fallible, very fallible, but nonetheless, we can get up and continue growing regardless of how much we fall. So that should be an idea we think about this week and every week whenever we read the stories of the Parsha. I wish everybody a wonderful Shabbos, all the best, and let's stay healthy. Take care.